Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Hope everybody's having a great week. We are sitting here getting towards the end of winter, about to hit that whole spring season and all that. So,
I got my stack of comics
you
though.
got a stack of comics there in the background. Mike and I have been talking a lot about reboots and things lately. We talked about DC, both of us being DC fans. We talked about whether we think a DC reboot would be helpful at this point. But we also, even though DC fans, we love Marvel. And I think we both agree that Marvel and DC both need to be strong for the comic book industry overall. And that it does not help. I think DC being better helps Marvel, Marvel being better helps DC. It's just a kind of a symbiotic relationship between the two. And so Marvel's interesting in that really the big hits that Marvel's had at the comic book store lately has been kind of their ultimate relaunch with Spider-Man, the Ultimate Black Panther, a little bit of rush for Ultimate X-Men too. We'll talk a little bit about that. But what's interesting with Marvel is Marvel's really never done a full reboot. They've had, I think, Heroes Reborn or Heroes Return in the mid '90s, where some of the Image creators got the Avengers characters, but they were eventually brought back. That's really close to that. Spider-Man has, of course, had through some really awful storylines, had parts of his history erased and returned, but they've never really done a line-wide Crisis on Infinite Earths or New 52 type of reboot. And so, again, as with all comic companies right now, outside, well, the big two, sales have been a bit down on a lot of characters. We're seeing some successes, but not. Well, I think Marvel, if they were honest, would tell you a lot of their books are not where they would hope them to be. So, Mike, for you on this, where would you be on a Marvel reboot? Do you think that would help kind of drive sales back or win some fans that have been lost?
Well, for me, I think it would be to draw me back in to Marvel because right now I'm only sub to two Marvels, and that's the Ultimate
Hmm.
series. I almost subbed to Ultimate X-Men because I was getting excited, like maybe I could get into X-Men again. But I think you saved me. What is it, 5.99 on that one on that adventure?
Yeah, it's not a bad comic. It's just not X-Men. And again, maybe it's not supposed to be. Nothing against the person who wrote and drew it.
So
They did what they could, but yeah.
like who do you want to draw in again? We always talk about like you got to tie in with the movies. You got to make a hit for the kids because let's face it. I mean, that's where the business was born and molded. So if you're, I think, yeah, I'm trepidatious about it because number one, I don't like the spin-offs into the different universes. That can get to be a little bit much. I know the Ultimate's in its own little universe.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying that where that's at right now, and I'm sub to it, so that's great. But it's got to be treated right, and it's got to, I hate to keep beating a dead horse with this, but you got to go back to the source material. I mean, these characters are mutable to a point, but then when you go outside the bounds, start watering down those fundamentals that made them so strong to begin with, then you're kind of losing your audience. I mean, from personal experience, like, and from my 16-year-old, he's like, he doesn't buy any modern Marvel anyway, and he's a huge Spider-Man fan, loves Iron Man, loves Wolverine, loves those characters. I mean, he's got all the action figures and everything, but I can't get him to the store to buy a comic because it's just not his thing. Now he's loving Ultimate Spider-Man, he's loving Ultimate Black Panther. He may
Mhm.
or may not like Ultimate X-Men. We'll see. So
Yeah.
would a whole reboot help? It might if it was done right. It could, it could inspire me. I mean, look at. I'd love to, buy a new issue of Captain America and maybe see what the Falcon's up to. My other favorite, but Thor. I haven't bought a Thor comic since 2018. I love Thor.
Yeah. No, I think, and I hate the idea of reboots. But what I hate worse is when they ruin the story. And the whole thing
Yeah.
it kind of gets to a certain point that maybe you need to. And then I think one of the things with Marvel, where I think Marvel has a different problem than DC. Um, DC's driven some characters into the ground with some bad decisions, but I think Marvel has done a worse job in the last couple of years in that Marvel has seemed to have an axe to grind with some of their characters, where it's not been so much
Captain America.
bad writing so much as it's almost been like an intentional knock this character down a peg. And I don't really get why. And then like a couple examples that I see. Spider-Man, and he is their best character. He is by far their most popular character. Whether you like Spider-Man or think he's overrated, there's no question he is Marvel Comics everything. I mean, the lights stay on at Marvel because of Spider-Man. The thing that's interesting is like in his own book, and again, Ultimate Spider-Man's a little different. In Amazing Spider-Man, they treat him like junk. They just do. He's always the most unimportant character in the story. He rarely wins. And they've taken this whole, the Parker luck thing that was always part of it. Yes, that's an element of Spider-Man's character, but he still won a lot. He still won the battles. What was
Yeah.
different is he won and there was a cost. Now it's just, nope, he can't win. He can't be happy. We're just going to make sure we take everything away from him.
And as a reader, you got to have those wins kind of like dovetailed into the story, like Roy Thomas or Stanley used to write, craft them to
Yeah.
where there was always a win in there for Peter Parker. So and that makes it interesting. If you're just losing, every time, it's not going to be interesting. And the thing about it is that I think some of the modern storytellers feel that all the stories have been told. That's simply not true. I mean, these characters were built in a way that you could take them, pretty much anywhere, put them into a situation, and as long as the fundamentals of the characters stay true, it's going to be a good adventure. Kind of like when we talk about with Conan, and
Yeah. No.
absolutely, if the fundamentals of the character are there and you're staying true to who that character is, it can be a good story. So if I could speak to the writers, I would say, don't be afraid to, if you're going to reboot, take Peter Parker back, and go from there again, because it's all there. It's all there for you to play with, and you can do a good story and not break the character. Case in point, Steve Rogers, right?
Yeah. No, I think the thing that's weird is it's gotten to the point with some of these characters where it's so predictable. And like, stupidly, this week they released a spectacular Spider-Man comic book, and I'm like, yeah, I'll try it. It's a team up comic book between Peter Parker and Miles, and I'm like, this could be interesting. Basically, the entire book is Peter's immature, and Miles knows what he's doing, and that's basically the book. The book kind of exists to show like, they're equals, and Miles is basically a little better than Peter, who's immature. And it wasn't insulting to Peter, but I knew it was predictable. I knew this book is going to exist to kind of take a little bit of the shine off of Peter and raise Miles a little bit. Um, and
And,
it's
and you
funny,
don't
like,
think that's even. I mean, somebody in the storyboard room doesn't say that doesn't need to happen. I mean, it
yeah,
doesn't need
the
to
thing
be.
is, they make it adversarial, and it doesn't need to be.
No,
You don't
it's
need to
unnecessary.
have, and it's the same. The one story that it's for me, I hated it, and it was one of the reasons I stopped reading the book. Was the Jane Foster Thor story, and I know you and I differ on that story. You liked a lot of that. Where I hated that story, you could have made that story compelling without having to do the hammer works better for Jane. Jane is braver than Thor. Jane is doing things that Thor could never think. And it's like, you don't need to do that. You can just do the adventure, but like it's instead of like we can't just show Jane does something that Thor can't. We have to put the dialogue in that lets you know. No, Mjolnir responds better
It
to
was painful as a Thor fan, but it was still kind of cool to see him go that direction. But that part was painful as a Thor fan because you want him to get the hammer back. He's incomplete without the hammer. He needs that hammer.
Well, the thing is, it could have been. It was so interesting in that story, and I'm sure over time. I mean, I'll be honest. It went on way too long, and I stopped reading about 75% of the way in. What could have been an interesting way? You could have had that the hammer picks Jane, and the entire story could have been about Thor showing, I don't need the hammer. The hammer's never been what made me worthy.
Yeah,
Instead,
that would have been cool. Yeah,
Thor became kind of a drunk. Thor became kind of a loser. Thor was always whining, and at the end, yeah, he became Thor again and all that. But like, you drug him in the mud for like 3 years, and it's like, as a fan, You didn't need to do that. You could have just had, hey, Jane gets the hammer. Jane's really cool. Thor's initially confused, and then Thor shows, hey, man, I didn't need. And like, what's interesting is like one of the better MCU films, Ragnarok, kind of did that. The hammer gets smashed halfway through the film, early in the movie. The rest of the movie is like Thor. He literally has that great scene with Odin where he's like, "Are you Thor, god of hammers or god of lightning?" And he's like, "Yeah, I never needed the hammer." And you get that amazing scene at the end where he fights.
Yeah, that was cool. That was really cool.
The comic, back when like the MCU used to deliver stuff like that for us, the comics took this very adversarial, no, we need to show you that Jane is better. There was a few months back, I was reading Captain America stupidly. I decided I'm going to pick that up again and get it because I always want Steve Rogers to have a good book.
Yeah, yeah, me
Did
too.
some War of the Captain Americas because Falcon's Captain America along with with Steve, and I love Sam, but they have of course they're gonna fight, and it's like I don't even need to read the book. I know what's gonna happen. The fight's gonna happen. Sam's gonna have been right. Sam's going to win the fight, even though it makes no sense that Steve would lose the fight to Sam. And it's exactly what ends up happening. And you could tell that writer just had a hey, we're gonna knock Steve down a peg, raise Sam up a bit. And it's like you don't need to do that. You can
And
make
that
him great without pushing Steve down.
and that's what I'm afraid about a reboot because the way they write the characters, if they reboot them, like we're going to have something completely unrecognizable. And I know it's a big gamble, like it's a new audience and we're trying new artwork and we're trying new this. They're grasping at straws to get back. And I would just say to them, no, guys, you don't have to. You can stay true to these characters and build great stories around them. They'll never get old. You know what I mean? They'll never get old, and you don't have to. But that kind of worries me about the
Well,
reboots.
I think where a reboot would have to happen, I think, in addition to like Spider-Man, the characters to me that they've just damaged where I don't even know how you fix them. What they did to Frank Castle, we covered that in a Punisher video, but they basically
That was weird.
went through and let's just dismantle this character to where there's really no going back. Unless you reveal that was some sort of evil clone, ridiculous soap opera style thing, there's no fixing that. The X-Men in recent years, they have turned every X-Men character into a murderer. And not like, they killed someone. You're talking like gleefully wiping out dozens. I mean, like there was an X-Men comic the other day, and like Nightcrawler is one of my favorite characters. Nightcrawler has always kind of had an intrinsic thing of like because of his faith, he doesn't kill. They've literally got him dropping people into the vacuum of space and not thinking twice about it. It's like, did Nightcrawler just kill like 10 people and not care?
Yeah.
It's like even when you read some of the stuff about these editors and writers when they get questioned about it, it's like, yeah, that doesn't really fit the character. But like the X-Men are at war, so Nightcrawler would kill in that scenario. And it's like, no, that's not the character. I think they've done so much damage to so many of their characters. A reboot might be the only way to undo some of that. In that I don't know how you coincide who these characters have been with who they're being right now. And then I think the other part is, and this is where I think Marvel has created a problem they never had. They got too many repetitive characters now. There's too many dang characters who are exactly the same. And
So
that
you
like
think you think a reboot would be good?
I think as much as I don't want to see, because here's the thing, where I hate about a reboot, are we really saying to go back and erase like all the stuff that Stan and Jack and all them did? And so it's like again, it's one of those things where I don't when people say reboot, I think some people think it's revert the character back to the origin story. I don't think you need to do that. But there's enough time shenanigans and Reed Richards and Ultimate Nullifiers that I think you could erase like the last 40 years of continuity. And then
Yeah.
I think we want to talk about how cartoons do this brilliantly. When Spider-Man gets
Start back like when, like 1985, 19.
somewhere in that. And then I think
Right.
it's one of the things like, like the Spider-Man PS4 game that was so successful. They didn't need to show you the origin story. They didn't need Ben Parker to get shot. They kind of just picked up and like, here, Peter's Spider-Man, got bit by the spider. Mary Jane's an important part of his life. And a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
Cartoons always do this. Kind of, hey, you don't need to see the origin story. Peter is Spider-Man, and all the classic elements are there. And what's weird about these characters, these companies know what elements people want to see. That's the weirdest part is like the Spider-Man people know. They know. Everyone wants to see him with Mary Jane.
Yeah.
It is literally like, that is the thing that will fix your comic, and you won't do it. Like they know in an X-Men book, if we gave you an X-Men book that had Cyclops with Jean and Nightcrawler and Wolverine and Colossus and Kitty Pryde, people are going to buy that. We
And
don't.
don't forget Professor Xavier.
Yeah, Xavier and Magneto. nope,
Yeah.
we're not writing that book. We don't want to write that book.
That's the book I want to buy.
And it's like they know
Yeah.
it was funny. It's like they're either willfully giving you something you don't want, or they're ignorant so much to the fan base that they don't understand.
That's the
Neither
book I
one of
want to
them,
buy. Yeah.
neither one of them is a valid excuse if you work
Right.
at a comic book company.
I
And
want to
it's
buy that book with Professor X and all the original guys
all
in it.
classic. And it's funny, like anytime they do this, you see excitement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimate
Yeah.
Spider-Man has the classic elements of Spider-Man in place. He's married to Mary Jane, and he's optimistic and hopeful, and he's more mature. Geez, like the comic book was doing 20 years ago. And I know I pointed that out a few times, but it always kills me that people are like, it's so cool that he's with Mary Jane. It's like, that's how it should be in every content
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no way Marvel doesn't know that. But it's literally, this would be if me and you ran a restaurant and we know everybody who goes here wants a cheeseburger. We're like, no, we're not making cheeseburgers anymore.
It's
You're
Taco Tuesday
going
every day.
out of
Yeah.
business. Will you make a cheeseburger? No. It's like, why? And so, to a certain point, again, I think
Uh,
it's the same thing as DC. A reboot won't. What I think is your point. A reboot won't mean anything if the creators don't change. And I think the sad thing that we're seeing with comics, we're literally seeing a lot of these creators. They rather bankrupt the line than give people what they want. Like than to admit we've been wrong. They'd rather run the brand into the ground than
I would hope it's not that. I would hope it's just I I kind of imagine myself in those meetings and ask myself why they would go this way or that way. And I kind of think it's a, oh, we got to try something new. We got what haven't we done before? And I get that, but no, you don't have to try something that new.
well, what's interesting is like, a lot of people blame the writers. I don't ever really blame the writers for stuff. Because look, everyone's gonna have a writing pitch. The person who's responsibility, it's the editor. It's the editor. It's kind of like you and I both worked in the corporate world for a while. Me and you both were been responsible at different times for different teams. If you put your team on a project and you tell them to do something, if they come back with a project and it's terrible, one of the things is like as a leader, I probably didn't communicate well enough to you what you needed to do. Or
Yeah,
two, I'm not going to approve it.
yeah,
That's the big thing that kills me with Marvel more than DC, even is like, I understand DC being a bit desperate. Because one of the things that DC has, DC's movie brand outside of Batman hasn't been good. DC's success rate in a lot of ways has massively been struggling against Marvel. And so I get where DC would be like, you know what? We got to be desperate. We got to try. We got to throw everything at the wall because we got to try to catch up. Marvel is like, you're the king.
yeah.
You're number one. You literally, I mean, for like what a decade there, you could throw out you made Ant-Man a bankable character at the box office. That's like
Right.
your 25th most popular character at best. You
Yeah,
turn him into a box office thing where little kids are running. I mean, it is always mind-boggling to me. I think
me
the
too.
good Green Lantern movie from DC, Ant-Man had a trilogy of films. Like, come on, man, really? Like Marvel, you're the king. You don't need to do some of these dumb things. And the thing is, what's interesting to me is like, I know sometimes it's like, well, we want to try to bring in a new audience. After like a decade, guys, it's time to admit you haven't brought in the new audience.
No,
So you
yeah,
got to try something else. But this continually running characters into the ground, getting rid of folks, and like where I think you can just look at Marvel and say some things have got to change. There's so many characters at Marvel who used to be able to sustain a book that can't anymore. And it's not because people don't like that character. It's because you literally won't give us the book that you know everybody would want. Like,
yeah. I think they've
hey,
just kind of forgotten that that's the book that we want to buy. And they're just going through a revolving door of, well, let's try this. Well, let's try this. Well, let's try this. We're going to try anime artwork now. We're going to try, Steve Rogers is a bad guy. We're going to try, and
Peter Parker sells his marriage to Mephisto.
yeah, yeah, we're going to try. You got to get out of that loop because it's not working. So, sure, let's do a reboot, but let's think about it first, guys. Let's think about it and let's see if we can get back to putting the elements of the story together that we all want to buy. Because I'm out here, I'm waiting for Thor. I haven't picked up a Thor book in 6 years.
You haven't missed much, my friend. You haven't.
But I want to buy a Thor book. I love
Yeah.
Thor. X-Men, I'd love to buy an X-Men book. You know, I'd
No,
love to buy.
it's the saddest thing. Like, I mean, like me and you do a comic book YouTube channel. We would love for these characters to be good. I am like, I want Marvel to make a good book that I can read. And the thing is, I can accept sometimes that I'm wrong on things and it's just not for me. And I'm okay when that happens. What I'm not cool with is like you're driving the brand into the ground and it's not what people want. Like one of the things I'll say, I personally don't like the character of Miles Morales. But the audience, in the terms of the movies, has reacted to such a way that that's a popular character. So
See,
whether
I
I,
like Miles.
yeah, and we're different. And here's the thing: I have no anger toward Miles Morales as a character. I am glad that there's fans.
I got Miles back there on the box.
Yeah, no. And here's the thing: I don't personally like Miles. I'm completely fine with him existing. I'm completely fine with him having a comic. I think it's great if it's brought in new fans. Cool, awesome, good for you. But don't damage Peter Parker to raise up Miles.
That's not cool.
And then the other part is it's like you're just watching them sometimes take these left turns with books where it's like what they did with the Punisher. And we mentioned this, but like you literally drove sales into the ground where the Punisher can't keep a 4-issue series. It's
That's
never
hard.
been Frank Castle's always been able to have a comic book. And it's
Yeah.
like it almost seems like a willful destruction rather than like, oh, we wanted to try things and it didn't work. So yeah, no, we may be at a point where a reboot is the only option. I hate saying that because it stinks to like spit on the creatives who have done such good work, but I don't think you'd have to do a full one. I think you could just kind of reset, put the classic elements back together. I think, and the thing is, anybody who knows comic books, you could get 20 people who work at Marvel Comics, who are historians of Marvel Comics, who could sit down and go, okay, look, guys, the parts of the history that need to be there for the character are this. And you know they can do that because
Roy Thomas, where are you?
Roy Thomas is still out there, right?
Save us, Roy.
And that's the thing, you know they can do it because anytime they launch a cartoon or a video game or a movie, even, they know that. Like the people who put together the MCU, they don't do it anymore, but they knew when they launched the Avengers, okay, here's what's important about Captain America. Here's
Yeah,
what's important about Thor. And you
yeah.
launch it. And I think the other part of a reboot that might help is while the movies are declining, the MCU put Marvel at a level it had never really been at before in terms of being seen by an audience who'd been there. There is still an interest in these characters. It may not be what it was at that fever pitch 2 or 3 years ago, but there's still a lot more people interested in Marvel comics than
And
there are.
talk about the tie-in thing. Like they're getting
Yeah,
ready to launch a new X-Men video cartoon.
yeah. New X-Men cartoon. They're doing a Wolverine game that's going to get a ton of push. And that's the thing is like if you can take these things, I don't remember the last time there was a run on Black Panther comic books for the main series of Black Panther. I
That
don't know
was
if that
cool.
happened at the comic store. Ultimate Black Panther came out and it was out of stock at most comic stores in this. I mean, you live at like the ninth biggest city in the United States of America. It was out of stock everywhere. It was gone. And the thing is, it's like, it's not that there's not Black Panther fans. It's that you've taken the comic book in such a direction, the character's unrecognizable. But when you give us, and even though the Ultimate one is not completely MCU, he looks like the MCU character, kind of acts like the MCU character. And geez, the people who have seen this movie in droves all of a sudden are like, man, that looks cool. I'll pick that one up. And so
Yep.
I think they could reboot without completely taking everything back to formula. But let us know what you think below. Do you think a reboot, a Crisis on Infinite Earth style or New 52, probably not New 52 style reboot would be good for Marvel? Do you think that might drum up some readership? Or do you think maybe just this Ultimate line is the way they'll go, that you just kind of expand that Ultimate line? Always interested in getting your thoughts below. As always, we thank everybody for watching, and we will catch you in our next video.